Number 11. Leonora R. A woman known only as Leonora R. checked her husband's phone and was shocked to see nude pictures of a younger woman. Blinded by jealousy, she decided to take revenge on her spouse without stopping to take a better look at the photos. It turned out that she'd been looking at her younger self. The Mexican wife stabbed her husband repeatedly, sending him to the ER. Fortunately, he was only wounded by her attack. Only the man's first name, Juan, was released to the press. Juan talked with the authorities and explained the pictures featured none other than Leonora. The couple had taken them years back while they were dating. Though Juan was badly injured by Leonora's attack, he was expected to make a full recovery. Number 10. Pilawan Kimapan. When Pilawan Kimapan received the news she was dying from cancer, she decided it was time to kill her husband. Kimapan couldn't deal with the idea her partner would find a new wife after she was gone. Neighbors described him as being popular and handsome, a working councilman in their village. Her jealousy was so strong that she picked up a .38 pistol the instant she got back home. The 38-year-old Indian woman shot her spouse before turning the gun on herself. Police officers arrived after being contacted by concerned witnesses. Kimapan was found dead on the floor by her husband's side, while he was badly injured with a bullet wound to his forehead. The man was still breathing. He was taken to the hospital and put on life support. Number 9. Australian wife. An unnamed 58-year-old woman was arrested after she attacked her husband and his younger lover. The Australian man was caught by his wife red-handed. The irate woman rammed his car, driving him off the road. The incident occurred in New South Wales and was captured by a dashboard camera. The older woman wasn't satisfied with wrecking her husband's property. After she was done, she drove back to the surf club, where her spouse's lover had parked her car. She crashed into it as well, before being apprehended by the police. Fortunately, no one was injured, though the jilted woman confronted her partner when he stepped onto the street. Witnesses told police officers that she assaulted both the man and his 40-year-old mistress. Number 8. Dolores Curitan. New York resident Dolores Curitan went into a blind rage when she discovered her spouse was cheating on her. In 2015, the 61-year-old woman smashed a hammer against her partner's Lincoln Town car, destroying all its windows as well as the taillights. The police arrived at the scene, alerted by neighbors, who claimed the older woman was holding a pistol. John Curitan, Dolores' significant other, was hiding in the couple's house, concerned about his well-being. He told the police that his wife had arrived home, gotten into his vehicle, and opened the glove box, where he hid his gun. Dolores admitted this was true, but denied attempting to fire it at herself or her husband. John Curitan refused to press charges, but Dolores was still charged with criminal domestic violence. Number 7. Kayla Jean Giles. In September of 2018, a Louisiana woman was arrested and charged with second-degree murder after shooting her estranged husband in a Walmart parking lot. 31-year-old Kayla Jean Giles had arranged to meet with Thomas Couty Jr., aged 30, so that the latter could pick up his stepdaughters. They were supposed to attend a birthday party for the couple's biological daughter, who was turning 2 on that day. Giles and Couty were going through a divorce, and in late August, the man had motioned for sole custody of the child, alleging that his spouse had been abusive towards him in the past. After they met in the parking lot, Giles fired a single round into his chest from 2 feet away. The couple's toddler and her 2 stepsisters looked on from a vehicle, but were unharmed in the shooting. Couty collapsed and, in spite of attempts made by first responders to revive him, was pronounced dead at the scene. Giles was arrested, and during the ensuing trial, her defense argued that the stand your ground law should apply to her, claiming that Couty had tried to force his way into the vehicle. The trial is ongoing, and Giles' sentence remains to be determined. Number 6. Chilean woman. While driving her BMW, a Chilean woman discovered her husband picking up his lover in his car. Enraged, she decided to follow them. When her spouse finally parked and stepped out along with his companion, the woman accelerated, crashing against the empty vehicle. Several people had attempted to stop her, with a man even going as far as trying to open her door. The jilted woman ignored them and, after destroying her husband's property, drove off. Her car was so badly damaged that she could barely see the road ahead. The hood had flipped up, covering most of her windshield. Videos of the incident were uploaded online, but the woman remained at large. No further information has been released to the press as of the recording of this video. Number 5. Chelsea Watrous Cook. Utah health teacher Chelsea Watrous Cook was arrested in November of 2018 for fatally shooting her ex-husband's girlfriend. 32-year-old Cook had gone to the Salt Lake City apartment of her ex, Travis, to drop off cold medicine for one of their toddler twins. Travis, along with his girlfriend, 26-year-old Lisa Villate Williams, and the children were making Christmas ornaments at the time. As he waited outside, Cook snuck into the apartment and locked herself in the bathroom. After the man called the police, Cook opened the door and reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a gun and, in front of her children, fired at Williams several times. The woman died after being struck in the chest, hip, and back. Travis wrestled the weapon out of his ex-wife's hands, after which she sat down next to the twins. Cook reportedly moved towards her coat again, while Travis was on the phone with 911, but he pinned her to the wall until the police arrived. In the past, Williams had been harassed by Cook, who'd showed up at her workplace and written her a threatening letter. Nevertheless, Williams was determined to make peace with the woman, who'd ultimately become her killer. For her crime, Cook was sentenced to 34 years to life in prison. Number 4. Janine Pugh. Janine Pugh was furious at her husband when he received a text message. The 48-year-old woman was convinced he was chatting with an unknown lover. Even though he offered to show her the phone, she decided to teach him a lesson. Pugh went into the kitchen and grabbed a 7-inch knife. She proceeded to chase him around the house, and the man ran outside. When the Wales resident made a run to a neighbor's door begging for help, Pugh managed to slash him several times. She kept accusing him of being a liar. Her husband was badly injured but was expected to recover. Authorities arrived soon after and had to drag Pugh away. She was sentenced to 25 months for her attack. Number 3. Jeanette Higginson. 57-year-old Jeanette Higginson was in the middle of a bitter feud with her soon-to-be ex-husband. They'd been married for 27 years, and she was angry when he filed for divorce, claiming severe drinking problems had ruined their relationship. By November of 2020, Higginson had already harassed her sister-in-law so badly that a restraining order was in place. She decided to take revenge on her estranged husband by setting their £400,000 family house on fire. Higginson called the firefighters and nonchalantly told them what was going on, saying, "It's burning. It's up to you." She had used a lighter and furniture polish to torch the place down. Higginson resorted to the drastic course of action after she'd become furious that her husband had sent her a notification stating he intended to sell the house. She was taken to the hospital where doctors treated her burnt hands. Since no one else was injured in the fire, Higginson was only charged with arson and violating a restraining order. She was subsequently sentenced to 34 months in jail. Number 2. Evgenia Davidadkin. When Slava Davidadkin criticized his wife's cooking, 31-year-old Evgenia decided she had had enough. He accused her food of being bland and told her that she'd use more salt if she loved him. The Russian couple had invited several guests to dinner when he blurted out the seemingly unforgiving insult. Evgenia waited for her husband and guests to fall asleep. Before grabbing an angling knife, she proceeded to stab him 35 times in front of their young child. After murdering her spouse, she woke up one of their visitors who was sleeping in a nearby room and asked him to call an ambulance. Though she was arrested soon after, Evgenia was eventually put under house arrest so that she could take care of her daughter. Number 1. Wu Shu-chun. Wu Shu-chun was asked by his wife to buy chicken legs for dinner. However, the East China resident forgot about her request and returned home empty-handed. The woman, whose maiden name was reported as Lu, was furious. The incident occurred on April the 13th of 2019, and neighbors reported hearing the couple arguing violently in their apartment. Lu was said to have developed a foul temper after marrying Shu-chun. His relatives claimed she'd hit him often, but he never struck her back. That day, Lu grabbed a fruit knife and stabbed him repeatedly. The couple's daughter witnessed the attack Her screams alerted the victim's mother, who was in the bathroom at the time. First responders arrived soon after, discovering Shu Chun lying in a pool of blood. He was rushed to the hospital, but was declared dead on arrival. Number 8. Jennifer Maldonado. On May the 21st of 2020, California resident Jennifer Maldonado fatally stabbed Angela Betts, aged 25, at her Bakersfield apartment. At the time, Betts was with an unidentified man who'd also been in a romantic relationship with 21-year-old Maldonado when the attack occurred. The latter had grown jealous after discovering that her lover was accompanied by another woman, which led to her violent confrontation. During the ill-fated altercation, Maldonado reportedly grabbed a knife and stabbed Betts through one of her legs' femoral arteries. The victim began bleeding profusely and was rushed to the hospital in a desperate attempt to preserve her life, but the car crashed before their arrival. Betts subsequently died from hemorrhage shock. It would take 2 years for the police to release the victim's phone back to her family, at which time her sister, Serena Recalde, uploaded a video to TikTok in which she revealed Betts' final selfies, taken less than an hour before she was murdered. Recalde's viral video also detailed how Betts' call to 911 had lasted for over 3 minutes. In the incident's immediate aftermath, Maldonado fled the scene and managed to evade capture for 8 months before finally being apprehended. Family members of the victim were appalled when the prosecution offered Maldonado a plea deal, reducing her charges from first-degree murder to manslaughter. In spite of the protests and victims' impact testimonies, she was sentenced to just 8 years and 8 months behind bars on April the 28th of 2022. Number 7. Majka Kukukova. On April the 5th of 2014, 48-year-old British millionaire Andrew Bush was returning from a trip with his girlfriend, Maria Korateva, when he was fatally shot by his ex-partner, Majka Marika Kukukova, in his Spanish mansion near Malaga. Bush had broken up with the 26-year-old swimsuit model 6 months earlier and had taken out a restraining order against her after she'd refused to accept the end of their relationship. Korateva, aged 23, discovered the former lover in Bush's bedroom, wearing pajamas, and ran outside to the car to alert her boyfriend. He instructed her to call the police, then went inside to speak with his ex. A few minutes later, Kukukova emerged from the mansion and told Korateva that Bush had given her permission to take the Hummer. Korateva, who hadn't been able to call the police due to her depleted phone battery, handed the keys over to her love rival, later testifying that she'd been too shocked to refuse. She rushed back into the house and discovered Bush's lifeless body. He'd reportedly been shot once in the shoulder and twice in the head. 4 days later, Kukukova, who'd fled the country in the aftermath, surrendered herself to the police in her home country of Slovakia. During the ensuing murder trial, she claimed to have been retrieving clothes she'd left behind when Bush and his new girlfriend arrived at the house. Kukukova assured the court that the gun had gone off during a subsequent altercation and that she hadn't meant to hurt her former partner. Nevertheless, she was eventually found guilty of murder in May of 2016 and consequently sentenced to 15 years in prison. Number 6. Sarah Williams. On January the 14th of 2016, 60-year-old Sadie Hartley was stunned with a cattle prod and stabbed over 41 times by her love rival, Sarah Williams, at her Helmshire, England home. 35-year-old Williams, along with friend and accomplice Katrina Walsh, had been plotting the vicious crime for over a year before finally committing it. She'd become obsessed with the victim's partner, Ian Johnston, a 57-year-old former firefighter, following a brief affair, and refused to accept his decision to end their involvement. The murderers had scouted Hartley's house, put a tracking device in Johnston's car, and bought burner phones, a taser, and binoculars in the months prior to the attack. Williams and Walsh waited until Johnston left for a skiing trip to the Swiss Alps to spring into action, ensuring that the victim would be alone. They knocked on Hartley's door and immobilized her with a cattle prod before unleashing what was later described as an orgy of violence. When police were called to the scene, they recovered CCTV footage showing the two culprits waiting outside the victim's residence and would later find Walsh's diary
which described the plot to kill Hartley in detail. Upon being found guilty of murder, Williams and Walsh were sentenced to 30 and 25 years in prison, respectively. Number 5. Ryan Donnellan. On August the 29th of 2016, 30-year-old Ryan Donnellan brutally murdered his former partner's new boyfriend, Stephen Chadwick, also 30, after luring him into a trap in Harpurhey, England. Donnellan and Nicola McKeegan, aged 25, had been dating for 9 years and shared a son together. Although McKeegan ultimately decided to put an end to their relationship, she reassured the man that she would never get in between him and their child. Donnellan grew increasingly agitated with their new arrangement and demanded to know if his ex was dating someone else, claiming he wanted to shake his hand. Chadwick agreed to meet with Donnellan, but was stunned when he initially asked if he would look after McKeegan and the child, since they had only been dating for a short time. Chadwick subsequently attempted to leave, but Donnellan pulled out a knife he'd been concealing and stabbed him 9 times. In March of 2017, the man was found guilty of murder and sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison. Number 4. Whitney Franks. Between August the 17th and September the 1st of 2020, Sports Direct employee Whitney Franks attempted to hire a hitman to murder her co-worker, Ruth Rutner, via the dark web. 26-year-old Franks began devising her sinister plot after discovering that Rutner, a newcomer at the Buckinghamshire store, was also dating her boyfriend, general manager James Prest. The latter was already involved in a serious relationship with a third woman, the mother of his 2 children, and had allegedly encouraged the rivalry between his lovers. On September the 2nd, Carl Miller, a BBC investigative journalist, uncovered Franks' request on the dark web, which contained Rutner's address as well as her physical description. Franks had offered $1,000 in cryptocurrency to carry out the murder. 8 days after Miller reported the post to the police, the suspect was arrested. During questioning, she told officers that she'd simply wanted to check if the dark web was a scam. Franks was charged with 1 count of soliciting murder and on the 22nd of September was jailed for 12 years. Number 3. Mohammed Shiraz Bashir. 41-year-old Mohammed Shiraz Bashir reportedly warned the police in Yorkshire, England, that he planned to harm his girlfriend's former lover, 34-year-old Craig Preston, days before he ultimately murdered him. On August the 21st of 2016, Bashir, accompanied by his girlfriend, 24-year-old Leonie Mason, and 3 teenage accomplices, beat Preston to a bloody pulp before discarding his lifeless body on the moors. The victim's remains were discovered the following morning. Bashir had threatened his love rival multiple times before the fatal attack and was actually detained for the threats on August the 13th, 8 days before Preston's death. He'd eventually been released due to insufficient evidence. An autopsy revealed that Preston had died as a result of a head injury sustained in the assault. Investigators discovered messages the 5 suspects had exchanged in which they detailed their murderous plan and shared pictures of the victim's body in the trunk of a car. Bashir and Mason were convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison, while their 3 accomplices, whose identities weren't released to the public, were each found guilty of manslaughter. Number 2. Els Klotmans. 26-year-old schoolteacher Els Klotmans sabotaged her perceived love rival's parachute during a skydiving trip in Flanders, Belgium, on November the 18th of 2006. Els Van Doren, aged 38, had become involved with fellow skydiver Marcel Summers, in whom Klotmans also held a romantic interest. When Van Doren attempted to deploy her parachute mid-air, she was disengaged from her skydiving partners. Her helmet camera showed her frantically attempting to activate the reserve parachute to no avail, as the cords to both mechanisms had been cut, and she tragically plummeted to her death. Following the incident, Klotmans was interviewed by the police along with the other members of the skydiving club. When she received word that investigators wished to speak with her a second time, she attempted to take her own life. Detectives discovered that both women had been involved romantically with Summers, and that Klotmans had had ample opportunity to sabotage her rival's parachute throughout the weekend preceding the incident. She was formally charged in January of 2007, but her trial didn't begin until 3 years later. Klotmans pleaded not guilty, but was nevertheless convicted of murder on October the 22nd of 2010, after which she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Number 1. Dennis Miller. In 2020, Dennis Miller, aged 22, viciously murdered his love rival, 26-year-old Denis Gubarev, in front of the woman they'd both been competing for at Novosibirsk State University in Russia. The 18-year-old woman, identified only as Sophia K., had decided to break up with Miller 3 months prior to the deadly incident and began dating Gubarev soon after. Miller, a psychology postgraduate who worked at the university, allegedly quizzed his students on whether he should kill his rival. However, none of the students reported the alarming episode to the police. On the day of the murder, Miller and Gubarev had begun arguing in front of Sophia. Miller eventually offered to forget everything and hug it out with his rival. Gubarev refused, at which point Miller pulled him close and stabbed him to death. After the police arrived, the suspect was allegedly smiling as officers handcuffed him and openly admitted to killing Gubarev. Sophia K. was found dead in her apartment shortly after the altercation. There were no signs of violence at the scene, and coroners later theorized that she died of a broken heart, brought on by the shock of seeing her ex murder her boyfriend.
Number 7. Michael Lawson. In 2018, 29-year-old Sarah Bramley broke up with her partner David Saunders and started dating someone new. Despite their relationship being over, Bramley reveled in the attention of both men and continued contact with Saunders in what can only be described as a love-hate relationship, with messages exchanged between them ranging from caring to downright personal abuse. Eventually, the toxic communication was taken too far when on July the 1st, after hours of furious texting, Bramley sent an explicit photo of her and her new lover, Michael Lawson, to Saunders. Scared that he would be enraged by the photo and come find her, Bramley then forced Lawson onto the street and locked herself in her home. The event unfolded as she'd expected, and Saunders had immediately grabbed a taxi to their location and went after Lawson. After a short chase, he killed him in cold blood with a single stab wound straight to his heart. Saunders was caught and pled guilty to murder. While he was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison, for his part, the court considered that Bramley had also played a role in the violent crime. On top of initiating an act she knew would enrage Saunders, as well as locking Lawson out, the court heard how she egged Saunders on by saying, "Feel free to smack him," after sending him an explicit photo. Bramley pleaded guilty to inciting or assisting in the murder of Michael Lawson and was given 4 months in jail. Number 6. Sean Dyson and Lucy Ann Rushton. Mother of 5 Lucy Ann Rushton was murdered by her husband Sean Dyson in June of 2019 after the man went into a jealous rage. Together for 4 years before getting married in 2010, the couple had recently split, with Rushton trying to finally put behind her what had been a toxic and violent relationship. The downward spiral of events started late in the evening on June the 22nd, when Rushton received a phone call from an ex-lover, which enraged Dyson. A child in the home at the time reported that Dyson told Rushton to swallow her ring because they were no longer together, and was woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of him beating her. The brutal and prolonged attack consisted of Dyson stomping, kicking and jumping on Rushton as she lay defenseless and half naked on her back. After calling the police in the early hours of June the 23rd, he disappeared for the next 10 hours and let paramedics find her lifeless body on the bed in her home in Hampshire, UK. Dyson went on to message police, family and friends to say that she died of drowning after he'd thrown water on her, but an autopsy revealed Rushton had a broken sternum, 2 collapsed lungs, and 37 fractures on her ribs. He was found later hiding in a cupboard and was charged with her murder. 2 weeks into his trial, he admitted guilt and was sentenced to a minimum of 17 years behind bars. Number 5. Keith Rizzo and Naomi Smith. Described as jealous and possessive by the judge presiding over his trial, 23-year-old Keith Rizzo was sentenced to 22 years in jail for brutally murdering his girlfriend, Naomi Smith, who had danced with another man at a pub night out. When the pair had started dating in early 2019, Rizzo already had a domestic violence conviction from an ex
and continued down the same path with Smith, according to reports. A week before her murder, she confessed to a friend that he had choked her until she passed out, and that he had broken and thrown things at her in the past. The night of the murder, a group of friends, including the couple, had gone down to a pub. Eyewitness reports stated that the night turned sour when Rizzo smashed a table worth of glasses and stormed out after spotting Smith dancing briefly with another man. Assuring a friend there that she'd be safe to go home, she went back to their shared apartment alone, only for Rizzo to show up later and break down the door. He played out his horrific attack with 2 knives, which he used to stab her 32 times, along with choking her and inflicting dozens of blows. The crime scene was described by paramedics like a horror film had taken place, as the carnage covered the entire kitchen. Immediately, Rizzo claimed 2 mysterious men had broken in and killed Smith over owed money while he was in the shower. The defense was questionable at best. CCTV failed to show anyone matching their description entering the building, and a number of women came forward to give evidence of his abusive behavior. Even a month after his conviction, a member of his defense team claimed that he still does not accept playing any part in her murder. Number 4. Sammy Lee Lodwig. A disturbing love triangle between a mother, her ex, and her daughter led to a gruesome murder in Swansea, South Wales, in 2019. After he was released from prison in 2015 for previously stabbing someone, Jason Farrell and Sarah Lodwig started an on-again, off-again relationship that ultimately didn't last. Unwilling to leave the family, the 49-year-old man began seeing Sarah's daughter, Sammy Lee, whom Farrell had known since she was a young schoolgirl. Despite seemingly having moved on with her younger counterpart, when Sarah got a new partner, Farrell spiraled into a jealous rage and attacked the man with a wooden pole. His rage unquenched by the attack, he then turned on 22-year-old Sammy Lee. He tied her up in his flat and proceeded to stab her face, throat, and chest 22 times. Before fleeing the scene, she died just 20 to 30 minutes before paramedics arrived to find her mutilated body covered by a duvet. Arrested later by armed police, Farrell asked for a pen and paper in which he chillingly confessed to having sliced her up. Even though he'd given a signed confession corroborated by physical evidence at his trial, Farrell pleaded not guilty on the basis that he'd been desensitized to violence after spending years in prison. The defense swayed neither the judge nor the jury, and Farrell was given a life sentence with a minimum of 26 years behind bars. Number 3. Carrie Farver and Shanna Gollier. In 2012, Dave Cooper moved to Omaha, Nebraska for work and started casually dating Shanna Liz Gollier, whom he'd met online. After leaving a long-term relationship prior to his move, he made it clear he didn't want to be exclusive, which wasn't an issue until 6 months later when he met Carrie Farver. The two got along really well, but mutually decided to keep it casual until only a few weeks down the line, Cooper received a breakup text from her number. She was reported missing a few days later by her mother, after last seen leaving his house by Gollier. The case went cold, but to everyone's surprise, her Facebook page was still active. For the next 4 years, Cooper would be continuously harassed by Farver, receiving 60+ texts and 100+ emails a day, despite him changing his number multiple times. Gollier, who he'd continued to see on occasion, also received messages, as well as Farver's mother and his ex, but still, no one had seen or even heard her voice. Threatening messages turned to vandalism when Cooper's work was targeted and Gollier's house was burned down, killing her family pets. Gollier had told police she suspected it was Farver, but the case remained cold until 2015, when a new team of investigators volunteered to take it on. Their investigation and intuition soon pointed them to Gollier, and using IP addresses and cell phone data, they discovered she had upwards of 30 fake emails using Farver's name and had a messaging app that allowed her to schedule future texts. The amount was shocking, with Gollier likely spending 40 to 50 hours a week impersonating Farver and stalking her contacts. In the end, despite graphic detailing of the murder by Gollier pretending to be someone else over email, no body nor any murder weapon was ever discovered. Gollier was still found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison in 2017, 5 years after it all began. Number 2. Angelique Sutton. In 2015, 24-year-old Ashley Wade
wanted a child so badly that she contrived a fake pregnancy and committed to convincing friends, family, and her boyfriend. Posting about it to social media, she reconnected with her former friend, Angelique Sutton, who was also pregnant at the time. They bonded over their pregnancies, and Wade invited Sutton over on November the 20th to give her a gift for her wedding, which was later that day. But the seemingly innocent invitation was actually a ruse, as Wade was jealous of Sutton's baby and wanted it for herself. Upon her arrival, Wade attacked Sutton, slashing her larynx so she couldn't scream before stabbing her face and neck upwards of 50 times. Keeping the injuries from the neck up, Wade then went for her abdomen and cut her baby out using a paring knife. Once in her arms, she wrapped it up, fed it formula, and pretended as though she had just given birth. Sutton bled out and Wade was immediately caught. In statements made by Wade in the aftermath, she claimed to truly believe that the baby once in her arms was hers and that she'd rescued it after her own imagined baby had died. The calculated attack by Wade and precise extraction kept baby Genesis alive. In a trial that lasted almost 2 weeks, she was convicted of second-degree murder and kidnapping and received a 40-year sentence. Number 1. Jonathan Amaral. Suspecting his wife Brittany of having an affair. After going through her phone in September of 2020, Armando Barron from New Hampshire, US, went on a jealous rampage. First choking out his wife until she passed out, he proceeded to lure her suspected lover, Jonathan Amaral, to a park, where he violently attacked him. Barron forced his wife to cut his wrists before fatally shooting him in the back of his car. Amaral's body was then taken to a campsite, where Barron allegedly forced his wife at gunpoint to decapitate the body before wrapping it in a tarp and hiding it. Amaral's body and Brittany were found together at the campsite by police when both failed to show up at work. Working with police, Brittany, her face covered with bruises, confessed to the gruesome chain of events. Armando was charged with capital murder and kidnapping, which carried a life sentence without parole, while his wife was indicted on 3 counts of falsifying physical evidence.
Number 7. Sakina Thompson. In the summer of 2022, a New York woman was arrested in the Springfield Gardens neighborhood of Queens in connection to the murder of 23-year-old Kayla Hodgson. The latter's body was found on July the 13th at a Broward County apartment complex in South Florida. She'd been fatally stabbed multiple times, and the primary suspect was subsequently identified as Sakina Thompson, aged 28. Although the circumstances surrounding the killing remained unclear, the motive was a reported love dispute, as Thompson and Hodgson were believed to have been dating the same man. After Broward County officials released a warrant for the former's arrest, she was taken into custody by the NYPD on August the 3rd, and the extradition process was set into motion. Number 6. Asha Maslin. On Valentine's Day 2014, Englishwoman Holly Gazzard, aged 20, broke up with her boyfriend, Asha Maslin. She gave him the news in a restaurant and had deliberately chosen the public place as she knew he was prone to violent outbursts. Maslin was controlling and possessive, demanding to know where Gazzard was at all times and turning up on the nights that she was out with her friends to follow her around. Gazzard's mother recalled one incident in which the former security guard had treated the young woman like a piece of dirt in front of friends and family at a birthday party. Unbeknownst to Gazzard, Maslin had been arrested 23 times in the past for a variety of offenses that included violence against at least 2 of his former partners, his own mother, and several other unconnected people. The police was made aware of an incident that occurred in July of 2013, in which CCTV had captured Maslin grabbing Gazzard by the throat. In another outburst in August, he pushed her to the ground in anger after they'd become separated at the Notting Hill Carnival in London, when Gazzard had taken his young nephew to a restroom. In spite of the man's aggressive behavior, they eventually resumed their relationship until the Valentine's Day breakup. In the aftermath, Maslin stole Gazzard's bank card and withdrew £300 from her account. He then bombarded her with abusive texts, threatening to harm her and her family. The young woman notified law enforcement on February the 15th, but they were unable to find Maslin, who'd reportedly gone on a drugs and alcohol bender in London. His movements in the days that followed would be retrospectively determined through CCTV. He was captured buying a 12-inch knife from a Wilkinson store, with the money he'd made from trading in his DVD player. Then on the evening of February the 18th, surveillance cameras recorded him walking towards La Bella Beauty Salon in Gloucester, where Gazzard worked as a hairdresser. Minutes earlier, he'd texted her sister's partner and written, "I warned you all." Gazzard had spoken to her boss about discreetly calling the police in the eventuality of the scorned lover harassing her at the workplace. There wasn't, unfortunately, enough time to do so. In the space of less than 2 minutes, Maslin stabbed Gazzard over a dozen times, inflicting devastating injuries. She was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital, and he was arrested on murder charges. Maslin was reported to have stood remorseless before a judge in July of 2014 when he was handed down 25 years to life. Number 5. Keith Connaughton. On February the 18th of 2017, after an argument, Irishman Keith Connaughton left the home he shared with his longtime girlfriend, Claire McGrath, in the Talla suburb of Dublin. The couple, who had a son, reportedly had a volatile relationship, marred by disputes which were influenced by their respective drug use. They typically end with Connaughton leaving their home. At the time of their latest argument, McGrath had secretly been seeing 32-year-old Graham McKeever. In the days leading up to the row, she'd sent him messages expressing her love and that she wanted to be with him. She asked McKeever to come over while Connaughton was out of the home and was in bed with him at around 4 a.m. when her boyfriend returned. McGrath would later tell the authorities, "I don't know why I thought he wouldn't come back. He always does," and described her failure to realize that aspect as a bad lapse in judgment. She met Connaughton in the kitchen and told him that their relationship was over. The situation escalated dramatically when the man realized that there was someone in the bedroom. He grabbed a knife and threatened to kill McGrath, at which point she screamed in fear and McKeever came out of the room, half naked. A fight broke out, during the course of which Connaughton stabbed McKeever several times, with one of the serrated blade strikes piercing his heart and killing him. In her original statement to the authorities, McGrath's description of the altercation depicted Connaughton as the main aggressor. However, by the time she was in front of a jury, she and Connaughton had made up and resumed their relationship, with her regularly visiting him in jail. McGrath denied that her boyfriend had pushed or threatened her and maintained that he was holding a knife because he was cutting cannabis. She added that he'd had ample opportunities to use the blade, but had only chosen to do so after McKeever had charged into him like a bull and started punching him in the face. Connaughton had indeed suffered a fractured orbital bone among other injuries. McGrath eventually agreed with the prosecution that her memory of the killing was unreliable due to her use of cannabis as well as prescribed Xanax and sleeping pills. Her original version of events prevailed, and Connaughton was found guilty of murder, for which he was given a mandatory life sentence. Number 4. Sinead Soto. In November of 2022, Texas woman Sinead Soto FaceTimed her boyfriend and became enraged when another woman picked up the phone. 23-year-old Soto broke into his Bexar County home and started a fire after stealing several items. Deputies later recovered a video that showed her in the act of setting the unnamed man's couch ablaze. "I hope your house is okay," she allegedly texted her boyfriend afterwards. She'd also FaceTimed him showing a chair on fire in the home. The blaze spread to the rest of the house, causing damage estimated at over $50,000. Shortly before 2 a.m. on November the 20th, the Bexar County Sheriff's Office, Little Fire Department, and Bexar County Fire Marshal's Office responded to the arson call. Soto was subsequently arrested. It eventually emerged that she'd been unjustly angry at her boyfriend since the woman who'd picked up her FaceTime call had been one of his relatives and not another lover. Number 3. Lindsay Stevens. A Mississippi woman was arrested in early 2021 for attacking her husband and delivering several non-fatal knife strikes. In the aftermath, Detective Abraham McKenzie of the Jones County Sheriff's Department spoke to the press and offered some insights into the suspect's peculiar motive. 33-year-old Lindsay Stevens had reportedly dreamt that her husband had cheated on her. Upon waking up, the incongruously scorned woman went to the kitchen, retrieved a knife, and repeatedly stabbed her husband in the back. The police was called to their Moselle home and Stevens was taken into custody on a charge of aggravated domestic assault. She was held at the Jones County Adult Detention Center on a $10,000 bond. The authorities didn't immediately disclose if mental illness or illegal substances had played a factor in the stabbing. Number 2. Lakveer Singh. For 16 years leading up to the fall of 2008, UK woman Lakveer Singh, a married mother of 3, had been having an affair with Lakvinder Chima, who'd once been a tenant in her home in Southall, London. 39-year-old Chima eventually ended the affair as he decided to settle down and have children. In November of 2008, he got engaged to 22-year-old Gurjit Chung, whom he'd only known for a couple of months. Plans were made for them to get married on Valentine's Day of the following year, in spite of tearful pleas from Singh for her lover to not go through with it. Then in December, Chima spent a week in the hospital. Singh stood by his bedside every day, and Chunga thus realized that they'd been involved. The younger woman warned Singh off, told her to forget Chima and to no longer interfere in their lives. Doctors couldn't determine the source of Chima's illness, even though it was suspected he'd been poisoned by Singh. It later emerged that within weeks of the engagement becoming final, Singh had traveled to India to acquire the poisonous plant Aconitum ferox, commonly known as Indian aconite. While she was eventually acquitted of poisoning for that incident, Singh would prove devastatingly effective in her revenge plot on January the 27th of 2009. On that day, while Chima and his fiancée were at work, Singh went to their West London home and laced a leftover curry in the fridge with aconite. That evening, Chima and Chunga had the dish while discussing wedding plans. After dinner, Chima, who'd had a second serving of curry, became violently ill. In addition to vomiting, he started losing his vision and the feeling in his body. Chunga reported the same symptoms. Aconite victims become paralyzed and their organs gradually stop working before they succumb to asphyxiation but remain conscious throughout the agonizing process. Chima called an ambulance and told the operator, "Someone put poison in our food. She is my ex-girlfriend." Family took them to West Middlesex Hospital where Chima died within an hour. Chunga, who was on the verge of death herself, was placed into a coma for 2 days. While doctors traced the poison and gave her an antidote, she made a full recovery, and Singh was arrested. The case became internationally known for the level of premeditation displayed by Singh, who was dubbed the Curry Killer, and for the fact that she became the first person to be prosecuted for murder by the use of aconite since 1882. Singh tried to place the blame on her brother-in-law, but a lodger had spotted her handling the curry, and a brown powder, later proven to be Indian aconite, was found in a plastic bag in her coat. On February the 10th of 2010, she was convicted of murder and causing grievous bodily harm. She received a life sentence with a mandatory 23 years. Number 1. Kiara Mack. After her boyfriend had left her for another woman in early 2020, Australian woman Kiara Mack launched a sustained campaign of harassment against the unnamed man. Over the course of 3 months, the 23-year-old sent him threatening messages and promised to ruin his life. She posted revealing photos of him on Instagram and was reported to have physically assaulted him. The man became so fearful of the scorned lover that he moved house. Mack, who at the time worked as an accountant, then obsessively drove the streets and in April located her ex's black Volkswagen. She spray painted the word cheater on it in pink and with a heart topping the writing. Mack then sent him a Facebook message that read, "I know where you live, I know where you work, I know your footy club, I know your favorite bars, I know the code to your house." In a follow-up threatening message, Mack insinuated that she'd be going after his sister's car. When she was eventually arrested and her phone was seized, the police found she'd previously conducted online searches about how to find people's home addresses and real estate listings for residents on the victim's street. Mack chose to represent herself during her appearance at Melbourne Magistrates Court in the summer of 2021. She described the messages as just us arguing and maintained that the scratches her ex had reported came from his footy matches and not her attacks. Mack also claimed that she suffered from mental health issues due to the breakup, the pandemic, and her own isolation. During a subsequent video appearance in June, she pleaded guilty to 6 charges, including stalking and assault. Mack broke down and begged the court to spare her a conviction, even turning off her camera at one point, which prompted a magistrate to tell her to stop acting like a child. She was eventually given a 15-month community corrections order in order to pay a $1,000 fine, in addition to undergoing psychiatric treatment. Number 7. Jan Porpel. On November the 16th of 2018, police and firefighters in Vancouver responded to an accident on the Barnett Highway where the driver, 31-year-old Jan Popel, had crashed a rented SUV into a streetlight. First responders used specialized power tools to extract the unconscious man from the wreck. In a nearby ditch, the authorities found 34-year-old Nicole Hasselman, also known as Nicole Porciello, who'd been a passenger in the vehicle and had been thrown 30 feet from it. Both were rushed to the hospital, but only Popel survived. While her injuries were consistent with the crash, medics also found 47 stab wounds on Porciello's body. She and Popel had been dating on and off again for roughly 7 years, but weren't together at the time of the accident. Throughout their relationship, Popel had been abusive towards Porciello and jealous of everyone to whom she got close. His possessive hold on her was evident to others, as in spite of how she was treated, Porciello kept giving Popel second chances. However, 9 days before the car accident, the mother of one once again ended their relationship as she'd begun seeing another man. Chilling evidence emerged in the ensuing investigation, which would reveal Popel as a calculated killer who'd staged the car accident to cover his tracks. On the 16th, while her 10-year-old was at hockey practice, the ex-boyfriend picked Porciello up in the rental. At some point during the ride, Popel pulled out 2 kitchen knives and began stabbing her. Then, as she was gasping for air, he took out his cell phone and recorded a video of them, which was later recovered by the authorities. In a last desperate attempt at saving herself, Porciello could be heard telling Popel that she loved him. The ex-boyfriend showed no mercy or remorse and kept blaming her for the attack. Then, while she was bleeding out in the car, Popel drove back to his home where for 2 hours he sent various emails and did some online shopping. Afterwards, he intentionally rammed the car into the streetlight, catapulting Porciello, who, unlike him, wasn't wearing a seatbelt, through the windshield. Within a few weeks, Popel was arrested and after pleading guilty to second-degree murder was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 15 years. Number 6. Jordan Taylor. In early July of 2015, Laura Davis, aged 21, was found barely alive outside the Essex Horse and Pony Protection Society in Pitsey Hall Lane, England. Davis, a valued member of the sanctuary staff, was savagely attacked by her jealous ex-boyfriend Jordan Taylor. They'd been dating for roughly 7 months, a time during which 22-year-old Taylor was possessive and controlling. He would tell Davis what to wear and became enraged when she went out. Davis's sister reported that their conversations, which usually went on for hours, were reduced to minutes as she'd become shut off and subdued. She eventually ended the relationship with Taylor, but he refused to let her go and exacted his revenge in a most violent manner. The man, who reportedly trained in mixed martial arts, went to the horse sanctuary armed with a 6-inch long kitchen knife. He stabbed Davis 87 times with such force that the blade bent at a 45-degree angle. The attack was captured on CCTV, and those who reviewed the footage would describe how Davis had begged her ex to stop as he repeatedly thrust the knife into various parts of her body. Taylor was arrested in the attack's wake and, about a year after the murder, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 23 years served. Number 5. Arsan Hassan. On September the 18th of 2016, about half an hour before midnight, Polish woman Zofia Sadowska was lured by her ex-boyfriend to a disused kebab shop where he'd once worked in High Wycombe, England. 28-year-old Arsan Hassan had become possessive of Sadowska, aged 20, and he wanted them to be exclusive, but in spite of their sporadic relationship, the young woman was still living with another partner. Hassan was overcome with murderous rage upon learning that she was sleeping with Osmar Asmar, his childhood friend and housemate. Asmar had acted as go-between between Hassan and Sadowska while they were broken up, before eventually engaging in a physical relationship with her. When Sadowska arrived at the rendezvous spot, CCTV footage would show Hassan stalking her from behind some bins. He then used plastic wrap to strangle her to death inside the shop, to which he still had the keys even though it was no longer in use. Hassan then put her limp body in a taxi, telling the driver that she'd passed out from drinking too much, and took her back to his home. The following day at around 5 a.m, emergency services were called to the residence and found Hassan on the floor of his room with slashed wrists. Next to Sadowska's body, he would try to dress up the killing through the false claim that he and his ex-girlfriend had made a pact to take their lives together. He thus pleaded guilty to manslaughter but not murder. He was nevertheless found guilty of the latter and sentenced to life with a minimum of 24 years served. Number 4. Isaiah Hagen. In April of 2017, Haley Rathgeber, aged 20, was found dead outside a soccer complex in Warwick County, Indiana. She had been shot in the back of the head at close range, and there were no signs that she tried to fight her killer, which led investigators to conclude that they'd known each other. The main suspect in the case was Isaiah Hagan, also in his early 20s, whom some sources referred to as her ex-boyfriend. During interrogations that lasted roughly 7 hours, he changed his story from initially claiming that he'd only met Rathberger briefly to admitting that he'd given her a lift to the soccer complex. Moreover, cell phone data placed him at the time and the scene of the crime. He also said that she'd loaned him $200. A towel with the victim's blood on it would later be recovered from his home. Hagan's mother, Donna, who worked as a corrections officer, would testify at his trial and state that her son had confessed to her that he'd shot Rathberger, claiming it to have been an accident. Donna didn't disclose the supposed confession when first interviewed by detectives. They were suspicious that she'd fabricated a story, knowing that prosecutors would have to prove intent to contradict the accidental shooting version of events. They would ultimately argue that Hagan had shot and robbed Rathberger after money she'd lent him had become an object of contention between them. Hagan, who'd maintained his innocence, faced life in prison but eventually accepted a plea of 60 years, which was upheld on appeal. Number 3. Hugo Castro. In October of 2015, California man Hugo Castro walked into the Santa Clara County main jail trying to turn himself in for killing his ex-girlfriend. He handed a civilian staffer a handwritten note disclosing her body's location. Strangely enough, a deputy turned him away, claiming the case didn't fall under the jail's jurisdiction, and instructed him to take the matter to the San Jose Police Department. The move was later heavily criticized, as it could have potentially resulted in a murderer walking free, and the deputy in question was reassigned. Perhaps stranger still, Castro did exactly as told by the lawman and walked unaccompanied to the police headquarters, where he surrendered once more. He then led officers to a condominium where aspiring nurse Alessandra Barles, aged 27, was found strangled and stabbed to death. Castro would eventually be sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murder. A motive wasn't made public, but in the past, Castro had been imprisoned on charges stemming from domestic violence. In 2009, he was sentenced to 3 years at a work camp in Carson City, Nevada, following a conviction for battery with a deadly weapon against ex-girlfriend Katrina Esparza. She drove from Reno and spoke at his trial, stating that with him behind bars, she no longer lived in fear. Number 2. Mateo Zavala. Tucson woman Marilyn Pacheco was gunned down in a drive-by shooting on the US's I-29 highway on June the 29th of 2019. The main suspect in the killing of 25-year-old Pacheco was her ex-boyfriend Mateo Zavala, aged 21. According to those familiar with their relationship, Zavala had been stalking Pacheco after they'd broken up. On multiple occasions, he'd threatened to kill her and anyone that she started dating. While worried for her, Pacheco's mother claimed that she never thought Zavala would go through with his menacing claims. On the day of the shooting, Pacheco was in a car with a friend and his young daughter when Zavala pulled up next to them in a second vehicle and unleashed a hail of bullets. Pacheco was fatally struck while the other occupants were injured, but they later recovered. Zavala was taken into custody on charges that included first-degree murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and felony endangerment, with bonds set at $1 million. Number 1. David Joshua Reed. In December of 2020, Texas man David Joshua Reed, aged 41, killed his ex-girlfriend and her boyfriend by ramming his propane-filled pickup truck into their RV. 23-year-old Shelby Duarte had told Reed that she was pregnant with his child, but that she wasn't going to leave her boyfriend, Timothy Nelson, who, like Reed, was also in his early 40s. Reed was unable to come to grips with her decision and loaded the front seat of his Dodge with propane tanks. He'd hoped that by smashing the pickup into the camper shared by Duarte and Nelson, he'd trigger an explosion and blow himself up in the process as well. Moments before, he sent a chilling message to his ex-girlfriend's phone, which read, "You reap what you sow. I will see you in hell." He then smashed his vehicle into the RV, and while it didn't generate the blast he'd expected, the high-speed impact was devastating. Duarte and Nelson were knocked over 65 feet from the camper and struck the front of a house. The latter died at the scene, while Duarte was lifted to a local hospital, where she too ultimately passed away from her catastrophic injuries. Reed survived the crash, pleaded guilty in court, and in October of 2021 was handed down 2 life sentences.
Number 9. Jenalicia Lawrence. On July the 18th of 2020, a 34-year-old man refused to argue with his estranged girlfriend, believing that he was avoiding conflict. However, confrontation was the sole purpose of 29-year-old Jenna-Leisha Lawrence when she showed up at the unnamed victim's home in Shreveport, Louisiana. Facing his complete refusal, the woman pulled out a gun, shot him, and fled the scene. Police patrol officers, who responded to reports of a shooting, found the man lying on the sidewalk, fighting for his life. He'd suffered a single gunshot wound and was taken to the hospital, where doctors performed life-saving surgery on him. Lawrence's criminal action sparked a police hunt that lasted several days, but she eventually turned herself in. She's expected to be charged with attempted murder in the second degree. Number 8. Emma Jane Magson. A night out in Leicester, England, ended in disaster for 26-year-old James Knight. On March the 27th of 2016, he and his 28-year-old girlfriend, Emma Jane Magson, were in a cab, going home after a night of drinking. They began arguing so intensely that the driver asked them to get out of the vehicle. They started walking as they continued to fight, and at some point, Knight pushed Magson into a parked car, making her fall to the ground. The argument continued after they arrived at Magson's apartment. At some point during their escalating confrontation, the woman grabbed a steak knife and stabbed her boyfriend through the chest, inflicting a wound 4.5 inches deep. She then waited 45 minutes to call the emergency services. The neighbors were reportedly awoken by Knight as he was screaming that his heart was bleeding. When Magson finally called the emergency services, she lied to the dispatcher about the gravity of her boyfriend's wounds and didn't mention that she'd stabbed him.
Ambulance, tell me exactly what's happened.
I don't know. My boyfriend's here and he's making weird noises.
Right, what was he doing to make... What?
I don't know. He's got a lot of blood in him. James, look at me, please.
Do you want an ambulance to come and take him to the hospital?
I don't know. I don't know if there's something up with him or he's just playing me about.
Is his eyes open at all? Is he awake?
Well, to be honest, it looks like he's sleeping, but it ain't how he normally sleeps because I live with him, so it ain't how he normally sleeps, that makes sense.
Right.
It looks like he's had a fight with someone.
We'll get someone sent over to him. It's been arranged. I mean, it might take a while, so I do apologise. It's bank holiday weekend and we're getting absolutely...
No, that's fine. Don't worry about it.
You've been out drinking all night?
Yeah, if I'm a bit honest, I think he took some drugs. I just think he's too smashed. That's what I think.
Knight eventually died, and even though she claimed to have acted in self-defense, Magson was sentenced to 17 years in prison. Number 7. Cordelia Farrell. It's getting worse and worse, and one of us is going to end up dead. 38-year-old Cordelia Farrell told police officers after being arrested for the assault of her 36-year-old boyfriend, Wayne Coventry. The British couple had been involved in what their friends and family described as a toxic relationship. In September of 2019, Farrell attacked her lover, allegedly dragging him by his testicles and biting his private parts. 1 month later, Coventry and Farrell got into an argument at the home of the former's brother in Bromsgrove, Worcestershire. As the fight got heated, Farrell grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her partner to death, piercing his chest and puncturing his aorta. The horrific scene happened in front of their friends, who later said they saw the woman grinning as she was pulling the knife out of the man's chest. At first, Farrell fled the scene, but later turned herself in to the authorities. In October of 2020, she was jailed for 10 years by the Worcester Crown Court for the manslaughter of her boyfriend. Number 6. Emily Javier. Emily Javier waited until her boyfriend Alex Lovell was in bed before attacking him with a samurai sword, after she'd become suspicious that Lovell was cheating on her. First, she found the Tinder app installed on his phone. Then she found strands of red hair in the shower drain at their home in Washington, USA. The woman reached her boiling point after Lovell came home one evening and ignored her. She went and taped a samurai sword to the side of their bed, and when they went to sleep, she hid his phone so that he couldn't call for help. When the lights went out, Javier reached for the sword and launched a frenzied attack, leaving Lovell with numerous stabs and cut wounds. As the man lay curled up in a pool of his own blood, Javier decided to call 911.
911, can I help you?
I just stabbed my boyfriend.
Okay, what is the address there? Okay, and tell me what happened. Okay,
I stabbed him.
Okay, is he awake?
He's dead. I think he's dead.
Okay, what is your name?
Emily.
Okay, where did you stab him?
He's sleeping in the bedroom.
No, where on his body? Where on his body?
Everywhere. Everywhere.
Okay. Can you get a clean, dry cloth or a towel and put it right on the wound? Okay, Emily, where is the knife right now?
It's by him. I use a sword.
You used a sword? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Emily, they're on their way as fast as they can. Is your door unlocked already?
Lovell was taken to the hospital, where doctors had to reattach some of his fingers and managed to save his life. Javier pleaded guilty to attempted first-degree domestic violence murder in court and was sentenced to 19 years in prison. Number 5. Thomasine Bennett. 67-year-old Thomasine Bennett was arrested in February 2017 after beating her boyfriend to death with a metal bat for 36 hours straight. She and 63-year-old boyfriend Walter Mack Clark were at Bennett's apartment in Northeast Washington. On February the 17th, officers received complaints of disturbance from Bennett's neighbors. They went to investigate and were met by Bennett, who took them to see the unresponsive naked body of her boyfriend, barricaded in a closet in a fetal position. She complained that Clark had made her smoke a drug called Love Boat, a mixture of marijuana and embalming fluid. She then told them she'd been beating him with a baseball bat for the past day and a half. Clark was taken to Howard University Hospital, where he was pronounced dead from multiple blunt force trauma. Bennett was arrested and pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter in July of 2017. The woman was sentenced to 10 years in prison by the Superior Court of the District of Columbia. Number 4. Samantha Adeokan. Just a couple of days before Christmas on December the 23rd of 2013, 41-year-old Samantha Adeokan and her musician boyfriend, Peter Davigan, were drinking at the latter's apartment in Stoke-on-Trent, Staffordshire, England. An argument erupted between the two, and in a drunken row, Adeokan began hitting her partner with her fists, feet, and a metal guitar stand until he became unresponsive. Instead of immediately phoning for help, Adeokan called her daughter, telling her she'd gotten in a fight with Davigan and that in self-defense she'd left him unconscious. The woman's daughter urged her to call for help, but the woman said she needed to change her clothes first, as they were covered in blood. She then proceeded to smoke cannabis, and only after 40 minutes did she finally call the emergency services. Paramedics arrived at the scene to find that Davigan had suffered internal bruising and bleeding and alerted the police. At first, Adeokan claimed she'd merely pushed her partner while trying to defend herself during the fight. However, post-mortem tests revealed that Davigan had been hit even when he was on the ground in a curled-up position. The woman was found guilty of murder and consequently jailed for life. Number 3. Sarah Boone. What a 42-year-old Florida woman first described as a game of hide-and-seek gone wrong was later revealed to have been a revenge murder. Sarah Boone and her boyfriend Jorge Torres had been drinking at their home in Winter Park on the night of February the 24th of 2020. At some point, Torres thought it would be funny to get inside a suitcase. Boone then zipped him up and left him there for over 11 hours, after allegedly passing out in her bed for most of the night. The next morning, in her call to 911, the woman claimed it had been an accident.
Okay, is he hanging from somewhere or what, ma'am?
No, I pulled him out of the suitcase. I tried giving him CPR.
Okay, so he was in a suitcase?
Yes, and I fell asleep.
How old is the boyfriend, ma'am? 42-year-old male. All right. Is he awake at all? Is he conscious at all?
No, he's purple.
Is he breathing?
No.
All right. I need you to get him on the floor, flat on his back for me, okay?
I did. I tried giving him CPR.
All right.
I tried giving him CPR.
Yeah, okay.
But nothing happened. He's purple.
Are you right by him now?
Yes.
Okay. Lay him flat on his... Okay, ma'am. All right, listen to me. Listen to me. I want you to lay him flat on his back for me on the floor.
I did.
Removing the pillows, okay?
Yes, I did.
All right, okay.
He's stiff and purple.
However, investigators found that the man's eye was bruised
and that he had a cut on his lip. It was later revealed that Boone had recorded her lover throughout the night as he was struggling to get out of the suitcase and slowly dying of asphyxiation, as he was begging to be freed because he couldn't breathe. Boone replied that it was how she felt when Torres would cheat on her. Sarah Boone was arrested on charges of second-degree murder. Number 2. Jodi Arias. A fatal attraction that led to a young man's bloody death is how prosecutors framed the murder of 32-year-old Travis Alexander at the hands of his girlfriend, Jodi Arias. In June of 2008, Arias stabbed Alexander 27 times, slit his throat, and shot him in the head at his home in Mesa, Arizona. The incident occurred only months after they had broken up their relationship, which was described as unusually tumultuous by their friends. In early 2008, Alexander told some of his acquaintances that he'd ended things with Arias after around a year of relationship. However, it's believed that they'd continued to see each other in secret solely for intercourse. In April, Alexander changed his travel companion for an upcoming work trip from Arias to another female friend. Shortly after that, on May the 28th, the home of Arias's grandparents allegedly got broken into by burglars. At the time, a .25 caliber automatic Colt pistol was stolen. In early June, after not being able to reach Alexander for several days, a group of his friends decided to check on him at his home. When they entered the residence, they found large pools of blood in the hallway and discovered his lifeless body in the master bedroom with a .25 caliber round next to him. In the 911 call, Alexander's friends mentioned Arias as a possible suspect.
Oh my God.
911 emergency. Hi, okay, what's going on?
What?
What's going on?
A friend of ours is dead in his bedroom. We hadn't heard from him for a while. We think he's dead. His roommate just went in there and said there's lots of blood. I didn't go in, but I can give you the phone to someone who went in there.
Yes, please, can you?
Hello.
Hi, so what's going on?
He's dead. He's in his bedroom.
Okay.
In the shower.
Okay, how did this happen? Do you have any idea?
No, we have no idea. Everyone's been wondering about him for a few days.
She said that there was blood. So is it coming from his head? Did he cut his wrist?
It's all over the place.
Okay. He has an ex-girlfriend that's been bothering him and following him and slashing tires and things like that. Her name is Jodi.
Well, I'm just going to keep you on the phone until officers arrive. Either officers or paramedics arrive, okay?
Okay, I think I can hear the siren.
The woman was arrested a month later and initially pled not guilty. She admitted to killing Alexander 2 years later, claiming it had been in self-defense. However, following several years of trials and appeals, Arias was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 1. Unnamed Moroccan woman. After a 7-year relationship with her boyfriend, a 30-year-old Moroccan woman experienced a moment of insanity when the man told her he was going to marry another woman. In the summer of 2018, the man's brother declared him missing after visiting the couple's home in Al Ain, United Arab Emirates, to ask his girlfriend about his whereabouts. The woman said she'd kicked him out of their home and that she didn't know where he was. About 3 months later, in November, the brother claimed to have found a human tooth inside the woman's blender. DNA tests confirmed the tooth belonged to the missing man and his lover was arrested. During questioning, she denied any involvement at first, but later confessed to the murder, claiming she wanted revenge for financially providing for him during their relationship. After killing him, she cut up his body and asked a friend to help her dispose of it. She confessed to using a blender to mince her partner's flesh, cooking it with machbouz, a traditional dish, and serving it to a group of Pakistani construction workers from a nearby site. The woman was sent to a hospital to determine if she was suffering from a mental illness, as she's meant to face trial after the investigation is completed. Number 9. Anastasia King. Anastasia King from Kyrgyzstan was only 18 years old when she met 36-year-old Indel King Jr. from Washington State. Anastasia had been introduced to Indel through a mail-order matchmaking service. Indel, a University of Chicago graduate, came across as a charming man, but soon turned out to be a textbook abuser.
He had initially made a good impression and won over Anastasia's parents, but after their wedding, he turned into an aggressive, controlling monster. He pressured Anastasia to have children right away. He also demanded she tell him her location at all times, didn't allow her to get her driving license, and told her he'd kill her if she ever left him. Anastasia was also forced to take up work as a waitress, as Indel had lied about his income. He reportedly funneled her earnings into his own pockets. Predictably, the relationship spiraled downwards, and Anastasia began contemplating getting a divorce. She'd been married to Indel for 2 years, which meant she could apply for permanent residency in the United States. However, Indel didn't want the divorce, having previously lost $55,000 while divorcing his previous wife, another mail-order bride. He plotted to have Anastasia killed, enlisting the help of Daniel Larson, a 21-year-old boarder who lived in their house. Anastasia was last seen alive in September of 2000. Upon returning from a trip to Kyrgyzstan, Anastasia was lured by Indel into the garage of their home, where he then grabbed her tightly. Larson tied a necktie round her neck and Indel strangled her with it. Larson later testified against Indel when offered a plea bargain for second-degree murder. In December of 2000, he led investigators to the site where Anastasia had been buried in a shallow grave. Indel received a 28-year prison sentence for Anastasia's murder. Number 8. Elena Barakina. Elena Barakina, a young Ukrainian woman, met David Sartin from Texas through a website promising Western men beautiful Russian and Ukrainian brides. Sartin and Barakina began seeing each other, with Sartin flying to Barakina's home country 6 times. He sent her tens of thousands of dollars in money and in gifts, such as expensive gold and diamond jewelry. He also helped fund her singing career. Anything she wanted, Sartin provided. However, when Sartin learned that she was cheating on him and sleeping with her former boyfriend, he hatched a plot to have her shipped over from Kiev in a crate. He planned to then imprison Barakina in his home and slowly poison her to death with lead. David hired who he thought were members of a Russian gang to do the job for him, but it later turned out that he was talking to federal agents, executing a sting operation. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Number 7. Oksana Makarova. Oksana Makarova, originally from the Ukraine, hit it off with Carl, a Florida physician in his 50s, at a mail-order bride mixer in the city of Odessa. Oksana was a single mother with a 2-year-old, and she was looking to ensure that her child had the best possible future ahead of him. When Oksana and Carl met, even Oksana's parents told her not to pass up the opportunity to be with him. It was only after the pair moved back to the United States that she would discover who he really was. Carl had pretended to be a kind family man who'd promised the world to Oksana and her son, but he was revealed to be a controlling abuser. He wanted children immediately, even purchasing ovulation kits so that he could track Oksana's fertility. He went as far as to dye Oksana's child's hair so that it more closely resembled his own. Carl soon began isolating Oksana from her family and friends and threatened to have her child deported if she didn't obey him. On one occasion, at a Walmart, Carl punished Oksana's child so harshly that social services were called. Oksana took the opportunity to tell them everything, and they helped her to escape the marriage safely. Number 6. Reina Świerski. Reina Świerski was a Filipino mail-order bride who went missing in 2005. She had recently married Gary Świerski, an American with a long history of abusing women. In 2008, hikers in Castle Rock State Park, California, came across a skull. 2 years later, it was identified as Reina's. Świerski's daughter confessed to authorities that she had aided her father in disposing of Reina's body after he'd strangled her. His daughter was just 19 years old at the time. The rest of Reina's remains are undiscovered, and Świerski was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his crimes. Number 5. Susana Remirata. In 1991, Susana Remirata met Timothy Blackwell through a mail-order bride catalog. After a couple of years, the pair was married in Remirata's hometown in the Philippines. Just 10 days later, the marriage ended in divorce proceedings as Blackwell had beaten and choked Remirata. During the divorce trial, Remirata, who was pregnant from a previous relationship, was shot and killed by Blackwell in the courthouse lobby. Blackwell was apprehended immediately and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Number 4. Io. Io, a Vietnamese mail-order bride, married Chinese man Lai Bing Hao in Guangdong, China. Bing Hao had purchased Io for just over $4,000, and less than 1 year after marriage, Io gave birth to twins. Bing Hao's mother moved in with the couple to help look after the baby boys, but things soon took a turn for the worse. Io and 3 Vietnamese men tied up and strangled both Bing Hao and his mother to death. Lai Shihu, Bing Hao's father, discovered them. Io had fled with the twins to a nearby town and she was caught less than 24 hours later. She was arrested on suspicion of murder while reportedly attempting to sell the babies for $9,000 each. Number 3. Alabani. Alabani was a 26-year-old engineer from Ukraine who'd become the mail-order bride of an American man named Lester Barney, who was 30 years her senior. The marriage between the two eventually failed, with Alla filing a restraining order against Lester. She also gained custody of their 4-year-old son, Daniel. One day, Alla picked up her son from school and was strapping him into the car seat when Lester attacked her with a knife. She bled to death in front of her son. Lester tried to claim the murder as self-defense, but the court saw through his story and he was sentenced to life in prison. Number 2. Emelita Villa. Emelita, a Filipino mail-order bride, met her husband through an agency when she was just 18. She was paired up with Jack Reeves, who was 46 years old at the time and a retired Army Master Sergeant. The couple went through 8 years of turmoil in their marriage before Emelita finally decided she'd had enough. She started making plans to leave him, but was murdered by Reeves before she got the opportunity to do so. Her body was found in Lake Whitney, a place where Jack's previous mail-order bride had allegedly drowned. In 1996, Jack Reeves was found guilty of the murder of Emelita, as well as having murdered his previous wife, Sharon, who was killed by a shotgun in what had been initially regarded as a suicide. Number 1. William Chase Hargrove. In April of 2017, the body of 27-year-old Anna Repkina was found outside the lumber town of Elsie in Oregon. Judging by her mangled remains, the authorities determined that she'd been killed via a shotgun blast to the head. The only lead available to the police was the name Kevin Thomas, found on a receipt in a takeout bag near the corpse. They followed up on it and interviewed the man in question. From that point on, a sinister murder plot began to unravel. Days before Repkina's body was found, Thomas had shared a KFC meal with 29-year-old William Chase Hargrove, who'd also asked to borrow his shotgun. The police uncovered that Repkina, a Moscow native, had been lured by Hargrove to the US with the promise of marriage. At the time, Hargrove was in an open relationship with a woman named Michelle Chavez. When it became clear that Repkina would be permanently moving to the US as Hargrove's wife, Chavez became jealous and gave the man an ultimatum, asking him to choose between them. Hargrove told Chavez that he was loyal to her even though Repkina, his fiancée, was still living with him. Chavez pressured him to get rid of the other woman. Consequently, on April the 16th, he took Repkina to the woods and shot her in the head. The murder weapon was found in his car and cell phone tracking placed him at the scene. Hargrove was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Thanks for watching. If you had the chance to marry someone who was perfect for you on paper, but you weren't allowed to meet them beforehand, would you do it? Let us know in the comments section below.